Before we get started with the video, I have two new apparel offerings that I am wearing right now and that are now available on the website for you guys. So first we have the BPA camo hat, and this is one of the most comfortable, best fitting hats that I've ever personally worn before. It's distressed, so you can see that they did some of the wearing in for you, and it has high quality embroidery. It's very comfortable, and it's going to end up being my favorite hat moving forward. Beyond that, we have the BPA logo baseball tee. So my sleeves are rolled up a little bit right now. You can see they extend a little bit past the elbow and extends well below the belt line. So it is great and practical for all different wearing applications, and this wound up being one of my favorite shirts as well. Very soft, very comfortable, and very happy to have it and very happy to offer it to you guys. So if either of these two items speak to you, they're now available on the website, and the products are linked in the description below. And if these don't do anything for you, maybe something in the future will. But with the business side of the house completed now, and the business side of the house talked about, rather, gone over, let's go ahead and get to the video. Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So to start this video off, we went ahead and made the two gusset panels, and they're all done aside from the final step, which is the dimpling. So what I have right here is a dimple die, and if you guys have never used these before, what they do is create forms like these right here on pieces of sheet metal. So in addition to looking cool, they really help to strengthen up the piece of material that you're working with, as putting complex geometry into the piece of metal makes it that much less likely to twist and distort and to lose its shape or lose its form. So I'm doing this mainly for the aesthetics of it, although there are certainly practical applications for it as well. So let me set you guys on the tripod, and we can go through using a dimple die, get these all squared away, then roll the welder over, tack them onto the dump tubes, and get to welding. Alright, so when you are using a dimple die, you first need to figure out which side of the die needs to go on which side of the sheet metal. So in this instance, this die is, I guess, the male die. And you can see there's that little bit of space in between the bottom of the die and the face of the sheet metal. So when this presses down, it'll put that kind of radius chamfered look into whichever side that it is facing. So I have this polished side, which is the side that I want to be facing outward, and the side that I want to have the inset portion of the die pressed onto. So that's the orientation that we're going to use. So from there, just with a simple base to a press and just this cheap Harbor Freight hydraulic press, all that we do is just keep pumping the bottle jack until we make the two sides of sheet metal match. So you don't need to go crazy with the amount of pressure that you're using. Once it bottoms out and you can feel a little bit of resistance on the bottle jack, you're probably good. And at this point, we now have the first dimple on this piece. So it's very easy, just working down the line of however many holes that you need the dimple. In this case, I have 5 on each of these gussets. And it's kind of boring and repetitive, but by the time that everything is said and done, you will end up with a cool dimpled panel like this. Well, the dump tubes are all tacked together, or the gussets are tacked together rather, and everything is squared away. Everything is ready to begin welding. So what I did here is essentially created a little manifold system so I can purge both tubes at the same time. So I debated running them in series essentially rather than in parallel the way that they are now, but I was concerned about having oxygen be trapped in one of the atmospheric air rather, being trapped in one of the tubes and not being able to completely evacuate it of the atmosphere in what will contaminate the titanium welds. So this was the next best option. Right now we have a single feed, or a single main feed going into two secondary feeds that will purge each tube individually, and then two purge plugs on the outlet side. All the plugs courtesy of Tycon and my buddy Brad at TIG Aesthetics. So this should work pretty well, and I'll just have to hook up my purge line, flow some gas through it for a little bit, so on and so forth. You guys know the way that it goes when you purge weld. And then I can strike an arc, get these things zapped together, and look at the miter cut at that point in time. I got the dump tubes marked out for the miter cuts, but I forgot that I'm out of anti-spatter spray. And if you guys have been around for a bit, then you'll know that anytime I'm cutting titanium with abrasives, I always use anti-spatter spray to prevent any debris from flying off and getting impregnated in the surface of the metal. Titanium is very willing and able to receive bits of debris, and you'll end up with a beautiful titanium piece with a bunch of little specks and pieces of metal and or abrasive that are embedded into the surface, and in my opinion, it just kind of ruins the piece. So I have these marked out, but I will have to wait until tomorrow probably to make those cuts and clean everything up. But that is no big deal because we have something else we can work on in the meantime. So what I'm going to work on next is building the trim piece, or the trim ring, that goes around the exhaust. So the whole ended up being a little bit abstract, as you guys can see from when the exhaust initially came out of here. So I'm going to take hopefully a piece of sheet metal that I have over in my miscellaneous metal pile, and I can make a little, essentially a decorative ring that will go around here and close this gap up and just make this thing look a little bit more completed and a little bit prettier. So I need to root through all of this stuff here and see if I can find a piece that is an adequate size. But I guess the easiest thing to do first will be to get a piece of just regular printer paper, and I can actually draft out what the shape of this will be, and that will give me an idea of the actual size of material that I need to make the ring itself. So the way that I'll typically do this is get my piece of printer paper and then get one of my fingers dirty, which there's never any shortage of dirt and grime around here, and I'll come in with a dirty finger and trace out the perimeter of the exhaust, or the hole that I'm working with, and that allows me to have a basis, or have a baseline of where I'm starting at with an actual piece of sheet metal. So there may be better ways to do this if I had CAD or something along those lines, or knew how to use it, but we're using pad right now, paper aided design. So I built a bunch of these. This works just as well. And there you can see the outline of the exhaust. And I guess you can come in as well and trace out where the edges of my hole are, because I will need to account for those as well. And there we have the base of this, and what I will do now is cut out the area for the exhaust, and then I can fit this piece of paper back over here and finish tracing out the perimeter of the hole in the carbon. And at that point in time, I have kind of an idea of the area that I'm trying to cover up, and we can go from there with this. A little bit of drafting and arts and crafts later, and we have the at least preliminary shape and everything for the trim ring. So it isn't exactly centered on the exhaust right now, but I will make sure that I get it centered when I'm actually drilling the holes and getting everything squared away in that regard. But I'm pretty happy with the shape and everything, and I stood back and looked at it a little bit, and I think that I can live with what we have here right now. So I'm not going to make it out of aluminum just yet. I'll give it the evening so that way I can come in the morning with a fresh set of eyes and make sure that I still do like what's going on before I make it, for all intents and purposes, permanent. But I did find a sheet of aluminum, and this is nice and thin, so it'll be nice and pliable to be able to fit around the curve on that fender over there. But everything is in line to be able to make this thing, but I'm running out of time today, so that will be a job for tomorrow. Supra's new titanium dump tubes are completed, and the miter cuts are done. All the final cleanup work is done. Obviously the gussets are in place. They're tightened down, ready to go into service, and I'm very happy about it. So now that those are squared away, we can shift focus to finishing up the trim ring. So I have my piece of aluminum over there, and now it should be a pretty simple matter of taking this paper template, transferring its shape over to the piece of aluminum, cutting it out, and then putting the little bit of form into it that it needs to match the contour of the fender. And then obviously fasteners as well to hold it in place. So when I put trim rings on cars, I like to bolt them on. I know some people will rivet them, but I like them to be a removable affair if they ever need to be taken off. It's a little bit easier to loosen fasteners than it is to drill rivets out, and especially with a nice fender like this, if you slip with a drill bit, you end up either punching a hole that you didn't want into it or scuffing up the surface finish. Things that aren't very good. So I bolt mine on, and I'll do the same with this. And I'll also show you guys a quick, easy trick that you can use to figure out equal bolt spacing, equidistant spacing of fasteners to have it look aesthetically correct, and you can be happy with the end product that way. Now, with our template off of the fender, we first need to make a center line around the whole template here. So the way that I do that is I will go around, measuring the width of the template the whole way around, and just making little hash marks as I go around this, or go around the shape of it, and then I'll freehand trace that out, and then I'll have the center line that I can actually measure the length of. Once I have the center line scribed on this, which we have conflicting lines, so you have to be cognizant of the line that you're following, but what we are working with is this one right here, and you can see, hopefully, this little hash mark right there. That'll be my starting point. So the next thing that I do is take a piece of wire, and you could use a piece of string or something along those lines, just something that is relatively thin and relatively pliable, so that way you can sit here and use it to trace out this contour. But I'll go, and starting from my initial index point, making sure that I have the wire as taut as I can, I'll go around like that, trace out that line, and then with a pair of cuts, I'll snip the wire off at the end, and that will give me the length of that line. And then it's just a simple division problem at that point in time to figure out, based upon the length of the wire, how many segments or how many fasteners there will be that will be easily divisible into equidistant and equal parts. Now that I have this piece of wire that matches up to the length of the center line on our template, I can go ahead and measure out the length of it. So I guess we can start from 1 foot or 12 inches and run this out, and we have 38 1/4. So we do 38.250 minus 12, that gives us an overall length of 26 1/4 inches. So now I can take that 26 1/4, whoops, and start doing some math to figure out what will be an easily divisible and, more importantly, more easily notatable length based upon just the imperial measuring system. So this will take a little bit of playing around. I mean, obviously dividing by 10 is 2.625, which is 2 5/8. So that could certainly work. So after playing around with a few numbers, I settled on the 10-hole spacing or 2 5/8 spacing between them. So at this point, all that we do is find some sort of a reference mark on the tape measure, which I guess I can retract this a bit. And actually, even better yet, we'll use this little ruler right here. So if I'm starting at 1, that means 2 5/8 is 3 5/8. So I can come in, make a mark, and then all that I'm doing is just walking my way along here. Equidistant spacing or equal spacing. And once I get all 10 of these marked out, then we can transfer these marks that are on the wire over to our template. So now that we have all of the little hash marks applied to this that signify where the bolt holes will be, I can put it back on my piece of aluminum and try to get it in the same location. It would have been better to do this before I had it taped down on here before, but that is not the order that I went in, so just have to deal with it and make this work. Not the end of the world. Actually, the smart thing to do would be just to tack one side down and then tack the other side down. So a lot of this, a lot of fabrication for that matter, is eyeballing and kind of getting things close, getting things where they look aesthetically correct, and making things work that way. There we go. So now I can come in with a handy center punch and punch a mark for all of those holes, and then drill them, and then I can proceed to cut the trim ring out. Now with all of the hole locations center punched, I can pull the template off of here and we will be good to go with all of that. So one thing I do like to do is I have this small hammer that I got, I guess, from my dad, and you can see a little silicone bronze weld to fasten the head to the actual handle. But I like to use that when anytime I'm doing some center punching, as I seem to have a little bit more control with that hammer, and I can be a little bit more precise than if I was using like my big ball peen, my big ball peen hammer here. And you can't hit as hard with the small hammer, obviously, but you shouldn't be trying to use a center punch to actually, you know, punch a hole into something. So the size of the hammer doesn't really matter, or we can tell ourselves that, I guess. But yeah, it isn't the size of the hammer that matters, it's how you use it. And take that as you will. So now what I'm going to do, and you can see the 10 little marks all around this that look to all be centered in their respective portion of the trim ring. And now I'll come around in an area like this where there's a little bit of a bump. I'll come in with the marker and kind of smooth that out just to give myself a better cut line in any areas like that right there that did not get covered by the marker as I was initially doing my marking. I can come in, do a quick tailor of all of those, and then we'll be ready to start cutting this out. put a third coat of SEM Trim Black on the trim ring, and this was a real heavy coat, so I'm going to let this dry overnight, and that will also allow time for Lord Bezos to get my fasteners to me, so that way I can actually fasten the trim ring onto the fender. You can see that I have my holes drilled, and I ended up oversizing these so that way the trim ring has a little bit of movement, so that way I can tailor the fit specifically and precisely to how I want it to lay on the fender. But we will get that squared away tomorrow morning, and then this car, for all intents and purposes, is done and ready to go back to the dyno at that point in time. Well, the trim ring, the paint is dry on it, and it's ready to go on the car. So this trim black laid down very nicely on this, and it'll look really cool once it's fastened on the fender. My fasteners, speaking of fastening stuff, also came in. I went with these here. It's a very low profile M5 by 0.8 by, I think they're 14 millimeter long little screws or fasteners that I got these off of Amazon, so funding Lord Bezos yet again, but it just comes with the territory in this day and age. And I also got this, which is a Nylock assortment, and this is the second assortment that I've gotten from Lord Bezos that is just a mess. And you can see that in transit things got moved around and shifted, now everything is all mixed up, and you can feel my eye twitching a little bit. So I'm going to start this off by organizing all of this so that way everything that's listed on this little notation sheet is correct. And then from there, we can go ahead, put the trim ring on. That will be done. And I think we're just about done with Mark IV stuff that can be done at this point in time. And I can move on to the Mark II. The trim ring is now fully installed on the car, and I'm not 100% satisfied with it, but it's at least on there for the time being. So there's a little bit of a gap on the front, a little bit of a gap on the rear, and I had chipped the paint with the tip of the exhaust as needed to loosen it in order to tighten down some of the fasteners. So it is not the perfect solution, but it's at least a solution for the time being, and I may end up building another one in the future. But for now, this thing's done. It's done for the time being at least, and I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Mark II. So I need to lower it down and clean it up and get it ready for clear coat, as it's finally the day that hopefully I can get some clear coat put down on it and get it one big step closer to being completed. Two coats of clear coat have now been applied to the Mark II, and you may be able to see the cloud in here, maybe not, but this is what we ended up with. So nice and shiny, and there are certainly some runs in it, as you can see that one right there, but for not being a painter, I'll call it good, and I can deal with getting the runs out of the paint at a later date, or out of the clear rather. So I'm going to get out of here, as I really don't want to be in here inhaling any more of these fumes than I need to. So once the clear coat has some time to dry, or like tomorrow, I can come back in, see how it looks then, and see where we need to go from there. Well, after the clear coat has had overnight to dry, this is what we ended up with. So by no means is it perfect, but for the skill set that I have, and to be frank, my complete lack of experience with any paintwork, I really couldn't be happier with it. Now, there are certainly some runs. You can see one right there. There's one on the front of the strut tower here. And presumably, if I went around the whole engine bay, I'd find a number of other ones. But those can be remedied with some wet sanding and a little bit of overspray that is still left over. If you guys can see maybe kind of this fuzziness that I guess kind of wipes off my hand a little bit. Those can all be fixed, and those are all things that I can deal with and get squared away at a later point in time. But all in all, I really could not be happier with this, and it's really cool to see this engine bay shiny, to see it looking good, and now, most importantly, to see it ready to receive the new engine. So before the engine goes in, I'll go through and do all of the wet sanding and the squaring away of the engine bay, and I also need to get some of the old components cleaned up, namely the subframe and some of the suspension bits. So everything truly is a fresh slate with this, but that's stuff that can be done later, and right now I'm just going to bask in the glory of a successful paint job. So with all of that being said, I think that will probably be about the end of this episode. So we got some stuff squared away on the Mark IV, got some stuff squared away on the Mark II, and I feel very fulfilled with the amount of progress that I was able to make on both of these cars in this episode, and I hope that you guys enjoyed coming along for the ride with me. So I thank you guys as always for coming along on all of these different journeys and all of these different adventures with me. This stuff is still fun. I'm still learning new things here every day, and one of the most important things to do in life is to always keep learning. And you hear it, it's almost a cliche saying, cliche phrase at this point, but the moment that you stop learning is the moment that you stop living. And the older that I get, the more that I realize that that really is true. So I'm trying every day here to learn new and different things and better ways to do things and always move forward. And I'm not necessarily saying that if I don't cross everything off the list on a given day, then it's a complete failure. But it's just nice to have things every day here and in other things that I do in life that serve as a reason to keep going. And I hope that you guys all have those things in your lives as well. But before I wax on poetically and philosophically, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. So, as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.